The news tonight that all Tottenham fans were dreading.
If Tottenham went into the market for a striker, you can imagine what a potential selling club would think.
I don't know why politicians don't do what the country wanted.
The one thing with things like this, like Brexit, is that the walls can be torn up and you can start again.
For once in the transfer window, we weren't expecting much to happen at West Ham. And then, bang.
We are just over 2 weeks from the end of this transfer window. To use a golfing term, is this moving day? If transfers are going to get done before the end of this window, is this the week that they need to start to get going?
Well, certainly a bit of a pick-up in business as of the weekend, back end of last week, weekend and start of this week. Certainly it's busier than it was, notwithstanding, of course, Chelsea's move for Pulisic, obviously one for next season, but certainly got a little bit busier this week. No sort of huge deals that we saw coming, but a couple of surprise ones, sort of mid-range ones. I say mid-range, we're talking 30, 40 million pounds. I suppose we have to look at that as...
That's mid-range now.
It is now, it is. It's incredible. But in terms of the timing, yeah, you would think, we look at transfers in the summer, sometimes, you know, we know the old cliche, don't we, sagas in the summer. I mean, like, you know, we see those and they take weeks and weeks and weeks, and sometimes still, having been mentioned in June, go up until the end of the deadline day, or towards deadline day. But it's amazing how, if there's willingness on both parties, you can still get a transfer done quite quickly. I mean, even in 2 or 3 days.
Chelsea are the side out of the top 6 that are dominating this transfer window so far. The deal for Pulisic is done.
Yeah.
But they've lost Cesc Fabregas over the weekend, and Maurizio Sarri has said already that he wants a replacement in the midfield. So how are they any further forward at the minute?
He said he wants 2 players. So it's quite rare nowadays that a man, even though it's commonplace, that a manager would admit that he has no control over the deals. But he does obviously have an input from a playing point of view, playing perspective, and he says he wants 2 players. And you would think that would be a midfielder to replace Fabregas, possibly now, maybe a short-term signing or a medium-term signing. But I think the priority for them has to be a forward. We've seen them linked in recent days with Callum Wilson, injured in the build-up to the Everton game for Bournemouth, and then Gonzalo Higuain, who of course has worked with Maurizio Sarri previously at Napoli. He's gone to Saudi Arabia this morning with AC Milan, where he's on loan from Juventus, but he's asked for his loan to be cut short. So he's arrived there today. They've got the Supercoppa Italia game against Juventus on Wednesday, but you'd think that he may be pulled out of that quite soon. But again, it depends on the willingness of the clubs to get it done, but the priority for them surely has to be a striker, yeah.
We know Chelsea only offer players in their 30s a 1-year deal, so how is Maurizio Sarri going to get round a player in his 30s coming over here to play for Chelsea, potentially for more than 1 year in the case of Higuain?
Well, you know, what's a policy? I mean, Manchester United 10 years ago had a policy where they only offered rolling deals to players over the age of 31, and then suddenly Sir Alex Ferguson leaves in 2013. They're not where they were in the table, and then the whole thing has to be withdrawn, and they start signing players who are over, well, certainly not necessarily 30, but over the age of 26. They never really signed anyone over 26. I remember talking to David Gill maybe 10 years ago, and he said that the Dimitar Berbatov deal, which I think was £32.5 million in the summer of 2008, he said that would be the last of its kind. That was one they really pushed the boat out for a real top draw class international striker that Fergie wanted. But if you look at it from there until Ferguson retired 5 years later, they never actually did that deal again. So, you know, policies don't necessarily last forever.
What does your gut tell you about what's going to happen this week in terms of the next few days? Are we going to see some movement?
Yeah, I think we will. I think Chelsea will get. They've been linked with so many players. I think they'll get one. I think they have to, once you've got your manager in place and things have gone quite well for Sarri. I don't think anyone was expecting Chelsea to win the league this season. But when you courted the manager for a while and you put him in place, and he says, you know, he's not saying he wants 10 players, he says he wants 2. And I think most supporters and most people who watch Chelsea regularly would say that they probably do need 2 players in the position that he's specified. There's an obvious gap up front, there's an obvious gap in midfield, and I think the board will look at that and think, well, that's a reasonable request, and we'll do what we can to get somebody.
And just to mention there, Tottenham, because they've lost Heung-min Son, who's off now. So they've beaten over the weekend in a very disappointing result at home.
Yeah.
And
Lost
without
Harry Kane.
Yeah, and without Son as well, will they be forced to dipping into the transfer market?
Well, Pochettino put the pressure on the board a week and a half ago, and that's before he knew he was going to lose Caine.
If we want to win titles, we need to operate in a different way.
I don't think they have any long-term faith in Llorente. Did well at Swansea 2 years ago. I just don't think a player, even of that calibre, can sit on the bench for so long and then just be expected to turn it on as soon as he hits the field for the first time in a couple of months, whatever, and getting a few minutes here and there. So I don't think there's much expectation from him. I think if there is, it's misplaced. And yes, there are goals in the rest of the team, but who do they get? I mean, if they do fancy Callum Wilson, well, as we've touched on already, it looks like they've got competition.
Is Alvaro Morata's Chelsea career coming to an end?
Ironically, he was the man employed to replace Diego Costa.
But we understand he is in talks with Atletico Madrid.
The news tonight that all Tottenham fans were dreading.
Harry Kane has now been ruled out for at least 7 weeks. If Tottenham went into the market for a striker, you can imagine what a potential selling club would think.
Spurs' transfer policy won't necessarily change.
And who's to say they wouldn't put a premium on a transfer fee or even a loan fee? Higuain, he cost £16 million for just a loan.
Tell us about the job of a loan manager, because a lot of football fans won't have heard of it, they may not know too much about it. Just tell us in a nutshell what exactly the job means.
I think predominantly for Premier League and Championship clubs, I think a lot of them now have a player loan manager or a term very similar. For me, when I started the role over 4 years ago, when I first took the job at Aston Villa, it was to send out under 23 players. Now I think the role's developed into first team players that a manager either doesn't want in his squad but wants to play and retain a transfer value, and the under 23 players that go out and gain their experience playing at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, which is invaluable for young players. For me, the younger the better they go and play real football.
Are you often going out and watching, for example, Aston Villa players that are out on loan? Are you out watching them, or are you, managing the whole situation from back at pace?
Yeah, between each window, normally it would have been over 10, normally between 12 and 15 players out on loan. So it's difficult to go and see them all of the time. We had a lot of players on loan in the Championship when we were a Premier League team. So sometimes that was easier. You could go and watch them play against each other, which was ideal. And we had a lot of players playing in Europe, so that was a little bit more difficult to monitor. But I think best case scenario, I would see them all play once a month and then visit them every other month and go and watch them at training, speak to them rather than just a WhatsApp group or a text conversation. I'd go out and see them and speak to the staff at the club that they were playing for. Let's
first of all just look at players in the under-23s. What is it you are looking for them to get out of a loan spell?
Well, if it's a first loan, it's vitally important that they go out and taste real football at 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, which for the average under-23 player at an academy club, they've never played at 3 o'clock before, so their routine has to change. It's normally 7 o'clock on a Monday evening with maybe a couple of hundred people watching the game. And I think for them it's different to go and play in a game where, there's mortgages and bonus at stake, and the supporters are paying their money to come and watch you play. So I think that experience is invaluable for them. Hopefully, best case scenario is they go back to their parent club and they play for that club at some point later down the line. But I think every player has a soft spot for the club where he makes his league debut, because that's really where you become a real footballer.
And often things will go well on loan, but sometimes things don't go so well on loan. So how do you manage that situation, both with the club and then with the player, if perhaps they're not getting in the team or they're not starting? How does that work?
Well, first and foremost, if they're not in the team, you tell them to work a little bit harder, because the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's what I was always told as a player. But I think managing their expectations before they go, and perhaps more importantly, making sure that you think you've got the right club at the right time. Now, I've done loan deals where, particularly over the last couple of years, since the rule changed that it has to go window to window, for a young player that can be difficult, because they go into the team at the beginning. The chances are that they might be playing for 2 or 3 managers during that 4 or 5 month spell, whatever it is. So, and he's going to pick different teams. But that again is just adding to their learning experience for the young players, because that's how football is.
And then moving on to players that are perhaps out of the first team picture rather than the youngsters then, how different are they to manage when you're managing an 18-year-old, when you're managing a 29-year-old pro?
Different, for obvious reasons. A senior professional knows all about the game of football and they've played maybe hundreds of games. It's just that they're under contract with one club where the manager doesn't want to play them. So they've got to go out and play football. So they appreciate a good loan, because it gives them the opportunity to then maybe make the transfer permanent, or also puts them in the shop window for other clubs. So we had a lot of championship to championship loans. So only on 2 occasions were they not allowed to play when they were playing against the parent club. But every other week they'd be playing, because they'd be paid. Their salary would be covered by their loan club. So very, very different, but both important.
Have you ever had to persuade anyone to go out on loan?
I'm not sure persuade would be the right word, because if they don't fancy it or they don't want to go, then you're probably not going to talk them out of it. I've explained the benefits of certain loans, and some they've gone on to take it, and others have stuck to their guns and said no. But it's the player's choice. They don't have to go out on loan, which is ideal. But I think you'll find that the majority of players want to go and play football, because there's no point being a footballer if you don't play football.
The government's Brexit deal has been rejected.
The biggest ever parliamentary defeat.
To listen to the British people who want this issue settled.
Chelsea are increasingly confident that they can agree a deal to sign Gonzalo Higuain.
And with the starman Harry Kane set to miss up to 2 months, Mauricio Pochettino has revealed Spurs won't be looking to sign a replacement this month.
I think it's a very good opportunity for players to maybe to play more, to step up.
Is there any way of predicting what might happen to the transfer market once Britain leaves the European Union?
Yeah, I think the weather reflects the mood generally, but in relation to your question, it's a difficult one. The problem with this whole Brexit scenario is that it's difficult to predict anything at the moment. Nothing is set in stone, it's all to play for, as it were. But there are obviously several options that could play out. One of them is that all European nationals post-Brexit will have to meet the current work permit rules introduced by the FA a number of years ago. Another one is that they'll all get some sort of lenient treatment, although that's looking less and less likely. And finally, some sort of new arrangement between the FA, the government and the Premier League, which actually is looking like probably the most likely option. So what we're hearing at the moment is that the Premier League wanting to scrap the FA rules completely and say, let's open the market completely. Let's not roll out the rules for EEA players, but also let's get rid of the rules for the non-EEA players. The FA are saying, well, we'll consider that, but the FA are really, really pushing the fact that they want to get rid of, or they want to change the non-homegrown rules. So at the moment, each club is allowed to have up to 17 non-homegrown players, and they want to reduce that to 13 for several reasons. One, to bring through more English players, and two, they see this whole Brexit as an opportunity to bring in their changes.
In one view then, we could see a scenario where the same rules apply for everybody, and potentially we could see players coming in from non-EEA countries, Brazil, Argentina, young talented players like that, that perhaps wouldn't have got in before, or wouldn't have been able to come over before?
Yeah, so absolutely. It's interesting. The one thing with things like this, like Brexit, is that the rules can be torn up and you can start again. So it's not always doom and gloom. There are some opportunities.
There's been a lot of examples over the last 10 or 15 years in the Premier League where talented players, one prime example would be Cesc Fabregas coming over from Barcelona to Arsenal between that age group of 16 to 18. Yeah. But with Brexit coming then, we wouldn't be able to get a hold of those players, or Premier League clubs wouldn't be able to get a hold of those players. So would you expect to see then perhaps an influx of those young players in this transfer window?
Yeah, that's what we expect, because as you say, that rule is expected to disappear from March 2019, so in a couple of months. So by the summer transfer window, that rule will no longer apply, and therefore the clubs won't be able to bring in those players. So we at Mishcon are working with various clubs, and that's what we are seeing, yeah.
Do you buy into the argument that clubs in the Premier League will be weaker for Britain leaving the European Union?
It depends on exactly what the rules will be in place after we Brexit, because as we said, we don't know what they are yet. But certainly in relation to the younger players, for sure, if we now are no longer able to bring in players at the ages of 16 and 17, then the other countries will have a competitive advantage over us, for sure.
At the moment, there seems to be a trend of young English players going abroad. We've seen Jadon Sancho move. Bayern Munich are interested in Callum Hudson-Odoi. Yeah. How would it affect them if they wanted to go and play in Germany in the Bundesliga, for example?
They also will have problems. So it's reciprocal. So just as we won't be able to attract European players as we currently can, the same thing will apply to English players going to Europe. So whatever the new rules are in place, hopefully will be reciprocal.
Breaking news to bring you here on Sky Sports News. And Cardiff City very close now to signing Emiliano Sala.
Let's go to Chelsea then. They've struck a deal to get their top target, Gonzalo Higuain.
Our colleagues in Italy are reporting that Aaron Ramsey has signed his pre-contract agreement to join Juventus in the summer.
Let's go to Manchester United. And could midfielder Scott McTominay be allowed to leave on loan? We're told United are considering it to Southampton. Their manager Ralph Hasenhüttl is trying to bring in reinforcements. Could RB Leipzig striker Jean-Kevin Augustin be of interest?
Carvey, it seems like we have been waiting an age for Chelsea to do their business and for their transfers to get moving. It seems now that we have that movement. Where are we at tonight, Thursday night, with their pursuit of Gonzalo Higuain?
Very close to the deal being done. We believe the deal has been agreed in principle. Obviously, it's very significant for Maurizio Sarri. He has made it clear that he always wanted Higuain.
Chelsea tried to sign him last summer. He was Maurizio Sarri's #1 target when he became the Chelsea head coach, but concerns at Chelsea about the fact that he was over 30 and he was going to cost a lot of money.
But Sarri seems to have won that sort of battle with Chelsea, specifically the Chelsea transfer overlord, if you could call her, Marina Gravskaya. She's the one who controls all the ins and outs at the club.
But effectively, they're getting a £75 million striker for peanuts, to quote Marko Arnautovic's brother.
They've got this problem up front. Sarri has told them the solution to our problems is Gonzalo Higuain. Trust me, back me, and that's what Chelsea have done.
We know that Harry Kane is going to be out for several weeks. And we heard from Mauricio Pochettino yesterday saying that they weren't really going to alter their transfer strategy in this window. Does that surprise you? I mean, what happens if Tottenham fail in the next couple of weeks in terms of on the pitch and they don't get the results? That's going to build that pressure towards the end of the window.
I think the fans are a bit worried about that happening. The last player I think they signed was a year ago, Lucas Mora. They have been linked with a few players this window. There was a link earlier today with Malcolm, the Barcelona winger, who I think's only started one La Liga game at Barcelona since he signed for them in the summer. He wants to move, but we're being told that there's nothing in that link at all at the moment. Though interestingly, one bit of information that we got from Jim White, who's presenting just behind me at the moment, I think, is he said that he had heard that the Spurs scouts had all been told that there was going to be a meeting today whether they were going to be discussing the strikers that they'd been looking at, the kind of forwards who they'd been monitoring. That was the information that Jim was getting. It hasn't been confirmed by Spurs. So that gives you a sort of hint that maybe Spurs are having a look at the market